waiting for you. One by one we will take you.
Or we could be doing a top 5.
We could be doing a top 5.
And you know what, David? I don't know if you know this or not, but when we do top 5s, people actually get top 10s.
That's true. You know,
because there's 2 of us.
That's right. And we each have our genres, we each have our opinions, and it's 10, baby. It's a top 10, really.
It is. Today's top 5 is best adaptations from a novel.
Man, did you find this as hard as I did?
This was hard. Extremely hard. And I had some criteria. I was to see if yours matches up with mine. Mine were that it could be an adaptation from a novella or a short story.
Yes.
But you had to have read it.
Yeah. That sucks too sometimes.
Well, and I not only have books that I haven't read that could potentially have changed this list. So I have like 3 honorable mentions and 3 books that I haven't read that may have affected this.
That's so funny because I have
the exact same.
I have 3 could have been on it, maybe should have been on it, kind of thing, and then 3 honorable mentions. So I'm the same way.
Yeah.
The other criteria was, you had to have seen the movie too. So that sort of thing. So we'll get there. I mean, with those, but yeah.
And the other thing is this the best or is it our favorite? And mine leans toward the best, but probably my favorites too.
Well, okay, good. I'll start. My number 5 is not the best, but it's one of my favorites.
Okay.
So it's War of the Worlds. The original War of the Worlds film, George Powell, which is an adaptation of H.G. Wells's novel. It is not a great adaptation of that book, but it's pretty good. And it's really a guilty pleasure of mine as far as an adaptation goes, because I really do like a lot of it. And I like the way it was filmed, the casting, especially the design of the spaceships.
The sound
design.
Sounds awesome in that movie.
And it keeps the core of the novel, which was this invasion unknown. Mars attacks us with these cylinders that then invaders come out of, and they're totally unstoppable until, a virus, a bacteria actually causes their death because they weren't used to Earth's environment. So
right, they weren't immune.
Yeah, so that's my number 5, War of the Worlds.
I love that movie, and it ties kind of your reasoning behind it kind of ties to my number 1. So we'll get to that in a moment.
All right.
My number 5 is Frankenstein, the James Whale movie from 1931.
Okay.
I have read this book by Mary Shelley. It is much different than the movie, but I like the movie better. I just do.
Okay.
Actually, now that I think about it, that ties into my number 1 as well. So
some of these we're going to do that because it's just we like that version. That adaptation is a popular adaptation or a favorite adaptation, not necessarily the best word for word from that novel, right?
No, okay. It's the best not reimagining it, but God, how do we explain this? It's an adaptation. It doesn't have to be exactly the same.
It takes key elements from the novel and makes it into a film.
I love the James Whale movie. It's iconic. The monster design is iconic. Boris Karloff is a genius in that role. I just love that movie, and I think it's a very, very good adaptation of the book, even though it does do things differently.
My number 4 is a really good adaptation of a novel by Patty Chayefsky, and the movie's called Altered State. I had read that book. I reread recently just to make sure that I wasn't stupid about this adaptation, and it is a fairly accurate adaptation, even down to the love saves us all kind of ending that they had. Not as visual, of course, as the movie, which makes sense. Ken Russell is, phenomenal, and we've talked about the visuals to that movie. But the basic story is there, the character development is there, the estranged relationship between both of them is there. So it's really good.
That's excellent. And while you were talking about it, I also discovered maybe this is my interpretation of adaptation. And that's what I'm saying is that it is improved. I think it's improved upon the source material.
Ooh, okay.
And I would agree with that with every single one of mine.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
My number 4 is Carrie, the 1976 Brian De Palma movie based on the very first published novel of Stephen King. I recently reread that novel, and this is a major improvement on that novel. Brian De Palma does a great job. I mean, we discussed it on the podcast, I don't know, a season or two back. I mean, it's perfectly cast, even though in the book she was overweight. They use Sissy Spacek, who is definitely not overweight, and she is wonderful in that part. It has a cohesive story, whereas in the novel, it's told in like book excerpts and newspaper clippings and things, whereas this is just a story. You know, they don't do it that way. And I think I chose it. There are a lot of Stephen King adaptations, obviously. I decided we could probably do a top 5 Stephen King adaptations when I got to them, but I chose this one because of the supernatural elements as a favorite.
What's her mother's name? That's not Blythe Danner. Who plays
Piper Laurie.
Piper Laurie. Man, she's good. But yeah, that's a great choice. That's a good one. Good adaptation. Again, like you said, improved on it. My number 3 kind of stretches our definition again in a little ways because it's not a movie, it's a series. But the first season of it was accurate. It's by Margaret Atwood. It's The Handmaid's Tale, a very good adaptation of that book. And to your point of improvement, since they did make it an entire, 8 to 10 episode series, they could expand on some of these characters that are kind of peripheral in the book. And now we get a little bit more backstory to them, sort of thing. But it basically ends the way the book ends, and it keeps the true line of the characters and the plotting. Of course, now naturally they've gone on since then, and now I think they're in season 4 or 5 or something.
I was wondering, do they just do the first book, the first season?
Yeah, they're out of source material by the end. That's why everybody was really curious about season 2. Where will they take it? Will they stay true? And even Margaret Atwood said, I love this version of it, and she really liked where they took the story. So yeah, that's my number 3 is Handmaid's Tale.
My number 3 is The Exorcist, which a little film by William Friedkin in 1973. Another one that we have obviously covered on this podcast. As a matter of fact, we have covered all 5 of mine on this podcast now that I think about it. It's been a minute since I read The Exorcist. It's a terrifying book, but I will have to say that the movie is equally as terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
Especially the mood that Friedkin can create, not necessarily showing the gore or the effects, but just the things he doesn't show is what really makes it a very, very scary adaptation. It stars Linda Blair, Ellen Burstyn,
Max von Sydow.
Max von Sydow. Yeah, I could not think of his name. I mean, it's a wonderful cast. Demonically possessed little girl, so you sympathize with the victim, and it was one of those that was also a cultural phenomenon too, because of the way it affected people in public, fleeing theaters and long lines as well. So that would be my number 3.
And that's a great choice. I've always said scariest movie experience I ever had. Number 2, again, kind of stretching it a little bit because not only is this a good adaptation, it's a good adaptation 4 times. So The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. The first one especially is a very, very good adaptation and improvement, as you said, over the original source material. The way they kind of changed some of the character interactions made it stronger and better and more cinematic to film. And then they carried those through in each adaptation. It's kind of like, she learned from the filmmakers as much as they learned from her original source material.
Why are you torturing me like this?
My number 2 is Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, man.
It is a wonderful book. It's an incredible book, but I think Jonathan Demme actually improved upon it with the casting of this movie and with his film technique. I mean, the whole infrared sequence at the end where Buffalo Bill has her in the basement is totally gripping. And even before that, when the FBI is breaking down the door and you think it's his house, and then you realize that it's not that house, it's the house that Clarice is at. And she, they open the door and she's there, and you realize, oh shit, she's by herself. I mean, everything they did in that movie was just spot on. I mean, it won the top 5 Oscars, I believe, and there's a reason for that.
There's a reason.
Yeah.
That's an excellent choice. Oh my gosh.
Number
Number one. So my number one science fiction adaptation novel to film is The Martian. Finally read it to ensure that when we covered it on the podcast, it just solidified it. To your point, as we've said, great adaptation of the source material, but some improvement on it. I love the way that Matt Damon plays the sarcasm and the humor, and the humor's in the novel, but the way he kind of subtly makes it more of a snarky sort of feel to it rather than it being just blatant funny line kind of thing. You know, they had his best friend save him in the novel, whereas it's her, the Jessica Chastain commander, who's feeling such guilt anyway. She's the one that physically rescues him in the movie, and it gives it a lot of catharsis and everything. So yeah, that's my number one, reluctant number one adaptation in science fiction history.
Well, that brings us to my number one, and my number one is Jaws by Peter Benchley. That book is okay. That movie is fantastic. The way Spielberg improved on that novel by taking out the unnecessary baggage and just making the heart of the story about those 3 guys out on the water. I can't think of a better movie adaptation. I really can't. And I've been talking about this for decades, mostly with you. I think it is just one of the best adaptations of any novel I've ever read.
Well, my second favorite movie of all time. So yeah. I
mean, Steven Spielberg, it was his first, well, not his first film, but it was his first big film. He just worked wonders with Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Robert Shaw.
Yeah. I mean, I think we mentioned it in the podcast that, you know, the one big difference that worked was in the novel, Benchley had the guys all come back every day. They went out to sea, searched for a shark, came back. They went out, you know, like 3 days in a row. And Spielberg said, no, once they go out, they're gone. And maybe they won't come back. And that alone made it, that whole last third of the movie is terrifying.
Right.
It's awesome. Yeah, that's a great choice.
Yeah, I mean, Benchley had Hooper having an affair with Brody's wife, and it was completely unnecessary. And she's a side character, so that, I mean, she really shouldn't be getting that much focus anyway. But it is a really sexy scene I read when I was like 14. It was really cool. Yeah, when you're like 14. All right, what about some honorable mentions? Well, before honorable mentions, my shoulda, coulda, wouldas, because I really have to say this, and I wanted to say at the beginning, but I think it's better put here. But I am sure that my list will change once I see Villeneuve's Dune. I have not seen the movie yet. I have read the novel. I've seen, of course, but I mean, it's on everybody's list. It's been touted as the best adaptation of Herbert's book. So I had to mention that shoulda, coulda, woulda been. And then my other two are The Arrival. It almost made the list just because of the short story, but I kind of kicked it out because it is a short story. It was pretty accurate to the short story, but not the best. And then the other one we've talked about before, The Thing, which again is that improvement. And is it horror? Is it science fiction? Is it a good adaptation? Nah, probably not, but it's really pretty cool. It's pretty damn cool. I will move on to mine that were shoulda, woulda, couldas instead of honorable mentions. And mine weren't movies that I haven't seen. They were just books that I haven't read. And I have 4. The Birds and Psycho. Ooh, good one. One is Daphne du Maurier and one is Robert Bloch, who are both writers I trust and I know are good writers. So I just have not read those books. So I'm sure that those are pretty damn good at adaptations of those books. Another is Let the Right One In, which is written by a Swedish man, but I've never read it. It's obviously been translated and sells over here in the States. And the movie is fantastic. So I suspect the book is good as well. And then lastly, it would be Rosemary's Baby. I've never read the book by Ira Levin. And I know that's a really good movie. And I have a feeling the source material is probably just as good because Ira's got a reputation as well. Well, it's interesting. My honorable mentions are, like we said in other top fives, they just didn't make the list. In comparison, I had to make cuts and say, no, one of them, because it falls into more fantasy and less into science fiction, which is similar to Hunger Games, which is J.K. Rowling's
Harry Potter series.
Okay.
Those are excellent adaptations, excellent adaptations of the books. What they cut makes sense. What they change makes sense. Casting is great. And like we said, yes, you're right. She learned from the filmmakers. So that was one of my honorable mentions. The other one is kind of a cheat. So it didn't really work. And that is 2001. If you look up lists of best sci-fi adaptations, you see 2001 on there a lot. I don't think that is accurate because they wrote them at the same time. And I don't think that's fair because the novel actually came out after the movie. So I don't think you can say that's a good adaptation of that novel when you were doing it in conjunction with the director. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I do.
It's kind of like, oh, did Alan Dean Foster have an accurate, novel of that Star Trek screenplay or that movie? No, he put it out a year later.
Right.
So no, it's not an accurate adaptation.
No.
And then my last one was A Clockwork Orange, which almost made the list because it is a great adaptation of that book.
It's more enjoyable than the book, I think.
Definitely. Especially when you have to go through the whole lexicon at the end to understand what they're saying.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's a great example of a good adaptation, but it almost made the list, but it got bumped because I like War of the Worlds. So
I love War of the Worlds. You make me want to watch it again. My honorable mentions, the first is a Stephen King, because like I said, there's so many Stephen Kings that I could have perused through, but the two best that I came up with were Carrie and this one, Misery. Misery is a phenomenal adaptation on par with Carrie and probably better than the novel. The only reason I chose Carrie was because of supernatural elements, and I tend to like those better.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Misery is an honorable mention. Another one that you mentioned is The Thing by John Campbell. John Carpenter's version is a great adaptation of that novel. It is sci-fi horror, and it's not really a novel. It's a novella, but it just didn't make the cut as far as those five I mentioned. I think the five that I mentioned might actually be slightly better movies. And then lastly, Candyman, based on the original from 92.
Right.
I've not seen the new one yet, but it is based on a short story by Clive Barker called The Forbidden. And the movie improves upon that short story immensely.
What's The Forbidden End? I don't think I've ever read Forbidden.
It's in one of the books of blood. I can't remember which one. Yeah, there's 6 of them total. So, but it's called The Forbidden. It deals with, the killer Candyman.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I think I learned from this experience I need to get back to reading more.
Me too.
This was fun.
Oh, I thought it was great. And for all of you guys out there listening, we would love to hear what you have to say. Just leave us a comment down below. We like hearing from you. It makes things a little more conversational. Also, if you're down there, you might as well hit that subscribe button, which would help us a lot and help us to do future editions of this show, as well as others that we do. And until we do another one, I guess I'll be seeing you, David.
I'll see you, Tim.
All right. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.